My name is Hazel, and I am 68 years old. This past Christmas, a question over a pot of my rosemary garlic mashed potatoes unraveled a lie that had been festering in my family for 2 years. The table was set with my grandmother's lace-trimmed linens, the good silver catching the soft glow from the pendant lights above. The scent of roasted turkey and pine boughs filled my cozy Portland living room, a familiar perfume of home and holiday. I had spent 2 days cooking a labor of love for my family gathered around me. My son Theodore, though we all call him Theo, sat at the other end of the table. At 42, he carried the polished confidence of Silicon Valley success, but I noticed a new permanent tightness around his eyes, like he was perpetually squinting at a distant screen. His wife, Genevieve, Jen for short, was a vision in cashmere, her smiles landing with practiced precision. My daughter Maya, 38, with a laugh that could warm a room, was there with her husband Ben, his carpenter hands resting comfortably on the tablecloth. The air was thick with the fragile warmth of a family trying to bridge the gap between my quiet-rooted world and their high-velocity one. We were passing dishes, laughter bubbling up from a story Maya was telling about her second grader's holiday play. The mood was light, the kind of normalcy I craved. Then Theo cleared his throat, took a sip of his Cabernet, and turned his smile directly on me. It was a wide, expectant smile, the kind he used to flash when he brought home a perfect report card. "So, Mom," he said, his voice cutting easily through the chatter. "The Mercedes. You never really said. Do you love it? Is it handling Portland rain? All right." A silence, sudden and complete, dropped over the table. I blinked. The Mercedes. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. "Theo, honey, I never got any car." The words hung there, simple and devastating. Theo's smile didn't fade so much as shatter piece by piece, leaving behind pure, uncomprehending shock. "What do you mean, it was delivered?" Jen handled everything. Every single head-turned forks paused midair, all eyes locking onto Genevieve. Her face, a moment ago, a picture of composed grace, froze. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving 2 spots of high, sharp pink. Her eyes, wide and suddenly alert, darted from Theo to me and back again. You know, sometimes the truth waits for the most ordinary moment to come knocking, right when you're just passing the gravy. If you're settled in, maybe with a cup of tea and you're watching from somewhere, well, where are you watching from tonight? I'd truly love to know. Before we go further into this story of a Christmas dinner gone sideways, I'd be so grateful if you'd tap that like button and subscribe. It lets me know you're here with me for this journey, and it makes sure you won't miss what happens next. The silence after my words was a physical thing, heavy and cold like a winter fog rolling in off the Columbia River. It swallowed the remnants of laughter, the clink of silverware, the gentle crackle from the fireplace. I watched my son's face cycle through emotions too fast to name: disbelief, confusion, a flicker of dawning horror, all directed for a heart-stopping second at me. "Oh," Hazel Genevieve's voice was a burst of sound too bright, too sharp. She recovered with a speed that chilled me. "You must be joking. Don't you remember the blue GLC? We talked about this. The delivery guy called you when he was on his way. We discussed the insurance paperwork over the phone." Her eyes were wide, imploring, painted with a concern that felt like acid on my skin. She was constructing a memory brick by detailed brick and handing it to me. I felt a dizzying sense of displacement, as if I had stumbled into someone else's life. My mouth was dry. I remembered the promise 2 Christmases ago. Theo, flush with the success of his company's first big round of funding, had promised a gift that would make my life easier. A car. He'd been so excited. And then the waiting began. The logistical issues Genevieve cited became a running theme, shipping delays from Germany custom modifications taking longer than expected, problems with the title transfer. Each time I gathered the courage to ask Theo gently, he was always in a meeting, and Jen would soothingly assure me she was on top of it. After a year, the shame of seeming greedy or impatient had silenced me. I let it go, or so I thought. "I am not confused, Genevieve," I said, my voice lower than I intended. It trembled, but not from weakness, from a rising cold fury. There was no delivery call, no insurance talk. I have no car. Theo found his voice, a strained attempt at peacemaking. "Mom, maybe there was a mix-up with the keys. Could they have been sent to the wrong address? A paperwork error at the dealership. He was looking at me, but his words were angled toward his wife, seeking a lifeline she could throw him. He didn't want this to be real. Maya, who had been watching with the quiet intensity of a protector, set her napkin down. Theo Mom's memory is sharper than both of ours combined. She remembers what I wore on my first day of kindergarten. If she says no car arrived, it didn't. Her voice was firm, a rock in the unsettling quicksand of the moment. Ben placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his quiet presence a silent endorsement. The rest of the dinner was a funeral for our celebration. We moved through the motions of eating dessert, a pumpkin pie that now tasted like dust. Conversations were stilted, orbiting far from the crater that had opened up at the center of the table. Genevieve became a whirlwind of false normalcy, clearing plates with a brittle efficiency, her laughter at nothing a hollow sound. Theo retreated into his phone, his brow furrowed, presumably checking emails or records, a digital wall against the human disaster in front of him. When they left, the goodbyes were ghosts of themselves. Theo's hug was stiff, his body tense. He whispered into my ear, "I'll figure this out, Mom. I promise." But the promise felt thin, already stretched to breaking by 2 years of silence. Genevieve's kiss on my cheek was a dry, cold brush of skin. No words, just the faint, expensive scent of her perfume, which suddenly smelled like betrayal. The door closed behind them, sealing me into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of my refrigerator. I stood in the hallway, surrounded by the ghosts of Christmas past, the lingering smells of a ruined feast. The hurt was a deep, throbbing ache, but beneath it something else was solidifying, a resolve, hard and clear as diamond. This was not about an automobile. It was about my word against hers. It was about being painted as a forgetful old woman in the eyes of my own son, and I would not stand for it. Not for one more day. The morning after Christmas dawned gray and quiet, a Portland winter specialty. The festive decorations around my house seemed like artifacts from a different civilization. I made a pot of strong coffee, the kind I usually avoided, and carried it to my oak desk in the den. This was my territory. For 35 years, I had been a research librarian at the community college. Chaos could reign elsewhere, but here among files and facts, I could establish order. I started with my email. I searched every possible term: Mercedes GLC delivery, auto dealership gift. Nothing. No confirmation, no follow-up, no insurance documents. There were the usual holiday newsletters and store ads, but from Theo or Jen regarding a car, not a single thread. I moved to my bank statements, pulling up the last 2 years online. I scanned every line, every automatic payment. There were no withdrawals for car insurance premiums, no strange deposits, no payments to a Portland parking garage. Genevieve had mentioned helping me set up automatic payments. It was a lie woven with specific verifiable threads, and those threads were nowhere to be found. Then I logged into my mobile phone account. The call history was a digital fossil record. I scrolled back to the period 2 years ago when the gift was promised, and there they were, a cluster of 3 calls from a number with a local Portland area code. Each call lasted less than a minute. I had never answered them. They had never left voicemails. A cold finger traced down my spine. But one entry stood out, one call I had made. I remembered it clearly now, the nervous flutter in my stomach as I dialed. I had called the dealership Genevieve had named Willamette Valley Motors just once, after 6 months of silence. A polite woman had answered. I gave her my name and my son's name, asking if there was any update on an order. She was kind, but unequivocally confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she had said. "I have no record of any order or purchase under those names." My phone rang, startling me. It was Maya. Her voice was tight with concern. "How are you holding up, Mom?" I told her about the emails, the bank statements, the phone call. I could hear her breathing change on the other end. "It's not a mistake, Mom," she said, her voice low. I've seen how she operates. She's always managed. Theo filtered everything. "Remember that check you sent for the kids' college funds last year? Jen told Theo you sent it to her to deposit, that it was easier. Theo mentioned it to me, all grateful. But when I asked the kids about it later, they had no idea. I think she just absorbs things, makes them part of her world. She controls the narrative." The pieces were clicking into a terrible, coherent picture. This was a pattern. I was not the first instance, just the most expensive one. "I need to talk to Theo," I said, my voice steady with a newfound purpose. The call with my son was one of the most painful conversations of my life. I did not lead with emotion. I led with the precision of my profession. Theo, I have no electronic record of this car, no emails, no bank activity connected to it. I called Willamette Valley Motors 2 years ago. They had no order for us. Can you please check your records? Your purchase confirmation. His initial response was a weary defensiveness. Mom, are you sure you're looking in the right place? Jen handles all the household paperwork. She's incredibly organized. Maybe the emails are in a different folder. The dealership might have merged with another. Theo, I said, cutting him off gently but firmly. I am a librarian. Finding information is what I did for a living. I am telling you with certainty that from my end, this car does not exist. The only evidence I have is a phone call I made to a dealership that knew nothing about it, and a call log showing calls I never answered from an unknown number. The silence on his end was long. I heard a soft exhale, the sound of a man feeling the ground shift beneath him. Let me talk to Jen. I'll get to the bottom of this. I'll call you back. He never did. Days trickled by, each one, stretching the silence into a wider chasm. The new year came and went, with no word. Then a text message flashed on my screen. It was from Genevieve. Hi, Hazel. Hope you had a lovely new year. So sorry for the confusion at dinner. Theo's looking into it. Must be a computer error at the dealer. Don't worry your head about it. Talk soon. XO. The cheerful emojis, the breezy dismissal, the condescending, don't worry your head about it. It was the spark that lit the final fuse. My head was the only one that had been worrying about it for 2 years. The waiting was over. If Theo was paralyzed, I would not be. I knew what I had to do. I needed to look someone in the eye and get an answer. I put on my warmest coat and headed for my car. Driving my 10-year-old Honda Civic to the luxury dealership felt like crossing into a foreign country. The Willamette Valley Motors building was all gleaming glass and polished concrete, a temple to status and speed. My sensible sedan looked like a humble peasant cart among the sculpted SUVs and low-slung coupes. I took a deep breath, smoothing my hands over my wool skirt. I was not here to buy anything. I was here for testimony. A young salesman in a crisp suit approached his smile, calibrated to welcome potential money. I asked to speak to the sales manager. My tone, the one I used years ago to hush chatty students in the library stacks, left no room for casual discussion. He blinked and nodded, leading me to a small, sleek office. The manager, a man in his 50s named David with a kind, tired face, greeted me. How can I help you today, ma'am? I laid it out just the facts, my voice calm and clear. My son purchased a car for me as a gift 2 Christmases ago. A Mercedes GLC. There have been consistent communication issues. I never received the vehicle. I need to understand what happened. My name is Hazel Miller. My son's name is Theodore Miller. David listened, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine attentiveness. He asked for the approximate date and my son's contact information. Let me check our system, he said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The wait felt eternal, filled with the soft hum of the building's ventilation and the distant murmur of a sales pitch. When he looked up, his expression had changed. It was a careful, neutral mask, but his eyes held a flicker of pity that made my stomach clench. Mrs. Miller, he began choosing his words with obvious care. I do have a record of a transaction. 2 years ago, December 18th, a Mercedes-Benz GLC 300 was purchased in full. The buyer was Theodore Miller. A wave of dizziness hit me. So it was real. It existed. He continued, his voice dropping slightly. The vehicle was picked up from this location on December 22nd. It was not picked up by you or by a delivery service. The paperwork shows it was released to a Genevieve Miller. She presented the authorization and drove it off the lot. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of his desk. She drove it away. Yes, Mom, David said softly. He turned his monitor toward me, not touching it, just letting me see. There was the invoice. There was Theo's signature. And on the separate pickup authorization form, a familiar looping confident signature. Genevieve. Can I have a copy of that? My voice was a whisper. He hesitated, then gave a slight sympathetic nod. Of course. For your records. He printed the single page, the one with her signature, and handed it to me. The paper was warm from the printer. It felt like holding a live coal. I thanked him my manners on autopilot. I walked back through the showroom past the shiny new cars, the proof in my hand making them all look like grotesque parodies. I sat in my old Honda for a long time, the engine off, the winter chill seeping in. The facts were now physical. The car was bought. The car was taken. Not by me. The questions screamed in my head. Where did it go? Did she sell it? Trade it in? Give it to a friend? The monetary value was staggering, but it was almost beside the point now. The theft was so much more profound. She had stolen the gift, my son's intention, my trust, and then she had stolen 2 years of my peace, replacing it with a low-grade anxiety and a forced silence. And she had made my son, perhaps unwittingly, her accomplice. The hurt solidified into something pure and unyielding, a demand for a reckoning. This could not be swept under another rug of excuses. Theo needed to see this, not hear about it secondhand. He needed to hold this piece of paper in his own hands, but presenting it would require a stage. It required gathering everyone back into the same room. I knew what I had to do next. I had to set a trap with truth as the bait. The plan formed with a cold clarity. This would not be another awkward phone call or a text message lost in the digital ether. This required a physical confrontation, a moment where no one could hide behind a screen or a turn back. I called Maya first. I have proof, I told her, my voice steady. From the dealership. Genevieve picked up the car. Maya let out a sharp breath. Oh, Mom, what are you going to do? We're going to have a family meeting. Here, at my house. I need you and Ben there. I need you as witnesses and as my moral support. She agreed without hesitation. Next, I called Theo. I didn't ask. I stated, Theo, we need to talk. All of us. In person. No more phone calls, no more texts. Please come to the house on Saturday. 1 o'clock. Mom, He started, his voice strained. Theo, I said, the finality in my tone, leaving no room for argument. Please. A long pause. Okay, we'll be there. The days until Saturday were spent in a strange, focused calm. I cleaned my house, not frantically, but meticulously, like preparing for a solemn ceremony. I placed the dealership document in a simple manila folder and set it on the coffee table in my living room. I baked a batch of Theo's favorite oatmeal raisin cookies, the smell of cinnamon and brown sugar filling the air. It was a deliberate choice, a tactile memory of his childhood, of my motherhood, a stark contrast to the cold evidence waiting in the folder. They arrived exactly at 1. Theo looked like he hadn't slept, shadows under his eyes, his usually crisp shirt slightly rumpled. Genevieve was a fortress of controlled appearance, a tailored sheath dress, her hair perfect, her smile already in place, brittle as sugar glass. She carried a bottle of expensive wine like a peace offering. Maya and Ben were already seated on the love seat, a united front of quiet solidarity. The small talk was agony, the weather, the drive. Genevieve complimented the cookies, her voice, a chirping bird, in a room heavy with impending storm. After the coffee was poured, I could feel the clock ticking down. I took a steadying breath and looked at my son. Theo, I began, my voice not loud, but it carried in the quiet room. When you asked me about that car on Christmas, you broke my heart. Not because I didn't get a gift, but because for 2 years your wife looked me in the eye and lied to me. And you chose not to see it. Genevieve's smile vanished. Hazel, that's a terrible thing to. Let me finish, I said, holding up a hand. My gaze never left Theo. I told you I would find the truth. I recounted it all, the timeline, my investigation, the lack of any evidence on my end. I told him about my call to the dealership 2 years ago, the nice woman who knew nothing. Theo was staring at his hands, his jaw working. Genevieve cut in, her voice rising, laced with a frantic energy. This is ridiculous, David. At the dealership must have misread the file. The records could be wrong. Maybe it was a different model. Maybe it was a different dealership entirely. Her lies were becoming tangled, less specific, more desperate. I let her talk. I let her fill the silence with her convoluted explanations. I watched Theo's face, saw the confusion and the doubt warring with a desperate need to believe her. Then slowly I reached for the manila folder. I opened it. I slid the single sheet of paper across the coffee table toward my son. The printer ink was stark against the white. This is from the sales manager, David, at Willamette Valley Motors. Your signature is on the purchase agreement. Her signature. I said, pointing a finger that did not tremble, is right there, authorizing her to pick up the vehicle on December 22nd. She drove it off the lot. It never came to me. I turned my eyes to Genevieve, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. Where is it, Genevieve? Theo picked up the paper. He stared at it. His face went from pale to ashen. He looked at the signature, then up at his wife. His eyes were wide lost. Jen, you told me it was delivered. You showed me a photo. You said it was in her driveway. You said she sent a thank you text. The dam broke. Genevieve's composure shattered. It didn't crumble. It exploded. The polished facade gave way to a raw, venomous anger, but it wasn't directed at Theo for his disbelief. It was aimed squarely at me. You have no idea. She spat, her voice a harsh whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. You have no idea what it's like. The pressure to maintain everything for his image for our future, that car was a resource, a liquid asset. I used it as a down payment for the Napa Valley property investment. It was for us, for our family security. Her eyes blazed with a self-righteous fury. You were perfectly fine in your little house with your little pension. You didn't need a $70,000 car. You would have just puttered to the grocery store in it. The confession hung in the air, ugly and absolute. It wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated conversion. My gift had been transmuted into a real estate investment. My son's gesture of love had been reduced to a line item in a portfolio. Theo made a sound, a low groan from deep in his chest. He wasn't looking at anyone. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed as if under a physical weight. The successful tech founder, the millionaire, looked utterly broken, a man who realized the foundation of his home was built on deceit. All those times he muttered, his voice thick with horror. All those times you said Mom was happy with it, that she said thank you. They were all lies. You let me believe that. This was the moment, the peak of the pain, the absolute climax of betrayal. And it was here in the wreckage that I found my strength. I stood up. I was not tall, but I drew myself to my full height. I looked at my son, my heart aching for his pain, but my vision clear. Theo, I love you. That will never, ever change. But this ends right here, right now. You have a choice. You can continue to live inside this web of lies where my love for you is quantified, stolen, and turned into a transaction. Or you can choose the truth. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed, a lost boy in a man's body. The truth starts with this. I continued, my voice firm, echoing in the quiet room. Genevieve will return the monetary value of that car with a fair interest calculated from the date of purchase. Not to me. I don't want it. It will be donated in full to the Portland Community Library Literacy Fund. They buy books for adults learning to read. I turned my gaze to Genevieve, who was staring at me with pure, undiluted hatred. And it starts with you both leaving my home. You will leave now. You can come back only when you are ready to offer a genuine, unorchestrated apology to me and to Maya for the lies and the manipulation. And you will come with a concrete plan for how you intend to rebuild trust. Not with words, with actions. I was not demanding a car. I was demanding moral restitution. I was seizing control of the narrative from the victim's chair and rewriting the rules. I was using the thing she valued most, money and status, as the currency for her penance, and directing it towards the thing I valued most, knowledge and dignity. Maya stood up silently and came to stand beside me. Ben followed, a quiet sentinel. The message was unmistakable. Theo slowly, painfully pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the paper in his hand one last time, then carefully placed it back on the coffee table. He looked at me, and for the first time that afternoon, I saw something besides shock or shame in his eyes. I saw a flicker of recognition. He was seeing his mother not as a supporting character in his life story, but as the protagonist of her own. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Without a word, he took Genevieve by the elbow. She shook him off her face, a mask of fury, but he was insistent, his grip firm. She shot me a final blistering glare, snatched up her purse, and stalked out of my living room through the hallway. Theo followed, pausing only to pull the front door close behind him, with a soft, definitive click. The silence they left behind was different from the Christmas night silence. That had been heavy with confusion and hurt. This was a vast, hollowed-out quiet ringing with the aftermath of an explosion. The adrenaline that had held me upright began to recede, and a tremor started in my hands. I sank back into my armchair, the bones in my knees feeling loose. Maya let out a long, shuddering breath and came to kneel beside me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You were incredible. You were so brave." I held on to her, drawing strength from her solid presence. Ben wordlessly began clearing the coffee table, gathering the untouched wine glasses and the plate of cookies. His simple, practical action was a lifeline back to normality. We didn't speak much. We just existed together in the aftermath, a small island of truth in a receding sea of lies. The days that followed were a strange limbo. The sharp pain of the confrontation dulled into a deep, pervasive sorrow. It was the grief for the relationship I thought I had with my son, for the daughter-in-law I never really had. I didn't cry often. I just felt quiet. I heard nothing from Theo. Maya checked in with me daily. She had heard from a mutual friend that Theo and Jen were in intense marriage counseling and that Theo had hired a forensic accountant to go through their shared finances. Apparently, the car was not the only discrepancy, just the largest. There were smaller things, charitable donations I was credited for, but never knew about family heirlooms misplaced. Each new detail was a fresh puncture wound, but they also validated my reality. I was not crazy. I was not forgetful. I focused on the routines that had always sustained me. I volunteered extra hours at the library sorting book donations for the literacy fund I had named. I joined a weekly walking group with 3 other women around my age. We walked the rainy paths of Forest Park, talking about everything and nothing grandchildren recipes, the stubborn rose bush in Martha's yard. I never mentioned my family drama. It was a sanctuary of normalcy. I was building a life around the new hard boundary I had erected. The pain was there, a constant companion, but it was a clean pain. It was the pain of a truth acknowledged, not the festering, infected ache of a suppressed lie. Then, about a month after the meeting, a certified mail envelope arrived. Inside was a cashier's check from a bank I didn't recognize. The amount was substantial, more than the car's original value, with a line item clearly stating interest. It was made payable to the Portland Community Library Literacy Fund. There was no note from Genevieve, no apology. But tucked behind the check was a small plain white card. On it, in Theo's familiar, slightly messy handwriting, were just a few words. "Mom, I am so sorry. I am learning to see. I love you. Theo." I held the card for a long time. The words were not a solution. They were not absolution. They were a beginning, a crack in the wall. I felt a tear finally escape, tracing a warm path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of happiness. It was a tear of release for the part of me that had been holding its breath for 2 years. The next day, I drove to the library and handed the check to the director of the foundation. Her eyes widened at the amount. "This is extraordinary, Hazel. This will fund the entire program for next year." I just smiled. I'm glad it can do some good. I did not call Theo to thank him for the check. The ball, as they say, was firmly in his court. The restitution was step 1. The harder work, the rebuilding, was his, to initiate, his to prove. I had found a strange, solid peace in the distance. It was a peace born of self-respect, and for the first time in a long while, I slept through the night. Winter softened into a wet Portland spring. The rhododendrons in my front yard burst into violent pink blooms, a defiant celebration after the gray months. The sharp edges of the Christmas incident had begun to blur, not from forgetfulness, but from being woven into the larger tapestry of my life. The hurt hadn't vanished. It had simply taken its seat at the table, alongside the love, the pride, the memories, both good and bad. It was a part of my story now, a chapter with a painful lesson but a necessary one. My healing was not dramatic. It was in the small daily reaffirmations of my own life, in the rich smell of coffee in my quiet morning kitchen, in the satisfaction of helping a young mother at the library find phonics books for her child, in the shared laughter with my walking group as we navigated muddy trails, our boots sucking at the earth. I learned to appreciate the profound freedom of living inside my own truth without the exhausting labor of deciphering someone else's fiction. The lesson wasn't about forgiveness as an obligation or about letting go of anger on a timetable. The lesson was about the inviolable sanctity of your own reality. I learned that love does not mean the absence of boundaries. In fact, setting a firm, clear boundary as I did that Saturday afternoon was the most loving thing I could have done for myself and arguably for Theo. It forced a truth so bright and uncomfortable that it could no longer be ignored. I learned that sometimes the most powerful action is a quiet, immovable refusal to play your assigned role in someone else's lie. Theo has started calling. Every other Sunday, like clockwork. The conversations are short, sometimes awkward. He doesn't make excuses for Genevieve. He doesn't try to explain away the past. He tells me about his work, asks about my garden, about the walking group. He sounds tired, but clear. Once he said, "It's like I've been living in a house where all the pictures were hung crooked, and I just got used to the tilt. Now I'm trying to straighten them and the walls are full of holes." I just listened. That was his journey to navigate. I have no idea if Genevieve is part of his future. That is his choice to make. That Christmas dinner didn't give me a Mercedes. It gave me back my voice. It cost me a certain fantasy of family unity, the kind that looks perfect in a holiday card photo, but it gifted me a reality built on respect, starting with my own. The car in the end was just a metal box on 4 wheels. What Genevieve tried to take, and what I ultimately reclaimed, was so much heavier and infinitely more valuable. It was my rightful place at the table on my own terms. And you know what? I still drive my old Honda. The seats are molded to my shape. It starts every morning, rain or shine. It gets me where I need to go. And the title is in my name. Some freedoms, the kind you can't put a price tag on, are the ones worth holding on to the tightest. I wonder how many of you have had a moment where you had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking your truth. What was that like for you? I'd be so honored if you'd share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like. It lets me know these conversations matter. And if you want to join me for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places, do hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for listening, for being part of this community, and remember, no matter where you are or what you're facing, your truth is always your most powerful possession. Wishing you all a gentle peace.